Before we go further, settle in wherever you are. Let us know in the comments where you're listening from tonight. We love knowing who's with us. The stagecoach had been climbing for 6 hours when the snow began in earnest. It came sideways, in sheets of white so thick the driver could not see the lead horses, and the wheels slipped twice on the frozen grade before he pulled the team to a halt at a small way station perched against a cliff face. The way station was built of pine logs chinked with mud, and it leaned a little, the way buildings lean when they have been standing alone for a long time and have stopped pretending they are straight. Smoke came out of its chimney in a thin, flat line that the wind took hold of and tore sideways before it could find the sky. Inside, the station keeper, a thin, bearded man who smelled of wood smoke and old coffee and a hint of pine resin on his hands, counted the passengers as they stumbled in. 6, plus the driver. He laid out what food he had on the long plank table. Salt pork in a tin dish, hard bread cut into thick wedges, a pot of beans already on the stove thickening with a slow, quiet bubble. He pointed to the second room, where 2 sets of bunk beds hugged the walls. Storm like this, he said, lasts 3 days, maybe 4. Stay or go. Most folks stay. And he set a dented tin kettle on a hook to swing over the fire, because it did not do to let strangers stand cold in your house no matter who they were. Most folks stayed. The woman they called Mrs. Hale was the last to step down from the coach. She was not young. She was not pretty in the way the world calls pretty. She had a wide face, work-roughened hands, and a gray shawl pulled tight against the wind. She carried nothing but a tin strongbox chained to her wrist with a thick leather cord wrapped twice over and knotted at the hollow of her throat. The station keeper offered to help her with it. She thanked him and kept walking, the way a person walks when they have decided which of their burdens they will set down and which they will not. Inside the way station, the other passengers had already chosen their seats around the cast-iron stove. A man in a preacher's collar, with gentle eyes and ink-stained fingers, was reading from a small Bible he'd taken from his breast pocket. A young woman, barely 20, dark-haired, her left cheek still wearing the shadow of a bruise she had not bothered to cover, was sitting apart from the others, her coat pulled over her hands the way a person covers their hands when they don't want to be seen. A boy of perhaps 17, all elbows and silence, was cleaning a pistol on his knee with a rag. A wounded soldier in a faded blue coat was sleeping in a chair, his arm in a sling, the wool army blanket tucked under his chin by the preacher before the soldier had woken up enough to argue. And the 6th passenger, the one no one quite trusted and everyone watched, was a tall man with a smooth-shaven face and a dark wool overcoat who had introduced himself, very politely, as Mr. Whitlock, a land investor out of Denver. He had bought 3 seats on the coach for himself alone. Mrs. Hale sat down on a low stool near the fire and took a long breath. She had been riding for 2 days to reach this coach, and before that, she had spent 4 nights at her husband's grave, sleeping in the wagon beside it because she did not want to leave him yet. Her name was Cora Hale. Her husband had been dead 3 weeks. He had been murdered for the deed that was now chained to her wrist, and she was bringing it, in secret, to a lawyer in Carson who had promised to help her. The storm closed over the way station sometime in the night. By morning, the door would not open against the drift, and the only sound in the building was the wind working its way along the chinks in the logs and finding the gaps no man had thought to fill. That was the first night. Nobody died. The second day was when Mr. Whitlock began to be friendly. He poured coffee for the wounded soldier, who could not manage the pot himself. He offered the preacher a section of newspaper he had carried in his coat, dated 3 weeks back, with news of a minor land dispute in the western counties. He complimented the young woman on the embroidery along her collar, and she flinched so visibly that even the boy glanced up from his pistol. He asked the station keeper about his coffee, his salt pork, his beans, whether he kept bees in summer, and did the bees make it through winter, and the station keeper, who was a lonely old man, answered each question in turn and forgot, for a few minutes, to keep his hand near the cleaver he kept under the counter. And twice during that afternoon, he walked past Cora, paused, and studied the leather cord at her wrist. Each time, he asked her a question. Where was she bound? Did she have family waiting for her? Was there anything he could carry for her, since she was clearly tired? Each time, she answered politely and changed the subject, because she had spent 30 years married to a man who taught her how men lied, and she had learned the lesson the way he had taught it, by watching, and waiting, and never speaking the truth out loud until the moment it could be of use. In the evening, after the preacher had said a quiet prayer over the salt pork, she walked out to the narrow porch to fetch a bucket of fresh snow for the coffee pot. The wounded soldier had followed her, coughing, because his cough would not let him stay warm anywhere but in motion. "I seen him looking at your wrist, ma'am," the soldier said. He was very young to have been in the war, a boy who had somehow grown old inside a uniform too large for him. "I've been on diligences before. You don't usually chain a tin box to your arm unless what's in it's worth dying for." Cora did not ask him how he knew. She said, "It isn't worth dying for. But somebody seems to think it is." "You want me to keep an eye on the smooth one?" the soldier said. It was not a question. "Yes," Cora said. "I would." She reached out and steadied him by the elbow when a gust came along the porch and took his balance, and she felt how thin his arm had become under the wool coat. He had given the war more than a sling, and she thought, not for the first time that winter, that the country took more than it ever learned how to pay back. Back inside the way station, the boy with the pistol had moved his chair so his back was to the wall. He had not said a word all day. Now, watching Mr. Whitlock refill the soldier's coffee with a steady hand, the boy spoke to the preacher in a voice barely above a breath. He said, "He's killed before." The preacher lowered his Bible. "Son, we cannot say a thing like that lightly. You can see it on him," the boy said. "Same as a brand. The way he shifts his weight when he's listening for a step behind him. He's not afraid of this storm. He's comfortable." The preacher turned the Bible over in his hands. He thought about the boy, and about the bruised young woman, and about the widow with the chained strongbox, and about the long ride still ahead of all of them once the snow let them go. He thought about how many prayers he had said in rooms like this one, and how few of them had changed anything yet, and how sometimes the answers came anyway, in the form of one careful stranger and one quiet widow and one boy who had enough honesty left to be afraid. He said, "We will pray." What would you have done in his place? Would you have spoken up, or stayed quiet, and let one stranger's knowing settle the room? The storm that night was worse than the first. The way station's roof groaned under the weight of it. The fire burned low because nobody wanted to venture into the woodshed for more. By midnight, the wounded soldier had grown worse. His cough had a sound in it that Cora had heard only once before, at a neighbor's house, the week her husband had died, when the doctor had stood very still by the bed and not tried to do anything more, which was its own way of trying. Cora tucked the wool army blanket tighter around him and sat down on the floor beside his chair to keep him warm. The boy, who had not slept either, moved the chair so he sat across from her. Between them, on the floor, lay the pistol, cleaned and loaded, with the rag still folded beside it as if he had meant to put it away and then, at the last moment, had decided not to. "What time is it?" the soldier whispered. "Late." "He wouldn't wait past tomorrow, would he?" the soldier said. "If he means to do what I think he means to do." "No," Cora said. "He means to do it tonight or in the dark of morning. That's how men like him have always done it. Quiet, and after midnight, and as far from help as they can get a person to be." "Cora," the boy said, and it was the first time he had used her name, and the second time he had spoken above a whisper, and the difference in his voice was the difference between a boy and a young man deciding to become something other than what he had been hired for. "There's a thing I should tell you before daylight. When they put me on the stage in Denver, the man at the ticket window was Mr. Whitlock's man. He bought my ticket for me. He told me to sit near you. He told me to watch the strongbox and tell him, when we stopped, which side of the coach you slept on." Cora looked at him. The lamplight was very low, but it was enough to see his face. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I was meant to use this pistol on you," the boy said. "And I won't. And I figure if I'm telling you the truth, I should tell you the whole truth." He told her that Mr. Whitlock worked for a man named Calder. Calder owned half the silver claims in 3 counties and held mortgages on half the ranches in 2 more. Calder had wanted the Hale's small parcel for years, the parcel her husband had refused to sell, the parcel that cut straight through the middle of Calder's planned road, the parcel that, because it belonged to a man who would not be bought, sat like a single stone in the middle of a machine Mr. Calder had spent a long time building. Cora's husband had been shot one night on his own porch. The deed had been missing from the strongbox when the bodies were searched. Whitlock had been sent to follow the coach and find where the deed had ended up. The boy had been hired for $5 and a train ticket out of the territory. He had been told it was just a robbery, It was not a robbery. I am 16, the boy said. I have never shot anyone. I don't want to. Cora looked at the pistol. She looked at the boy. You will not shoot anyone tonight, she said. And you will not shoot anyone tomorrow. We will handle this. He nodded. He put the pistol back into his belt. His hands were shaking, and she reached out, very briefly, and set her hand on his wrist, the way a mother steadies a child who has just handed back a thing he was about to throw, not in anger, but in fear. And the boy looked at her hand, and she took hers back, because there are moments when too much kindness becomes a weight of its own. The preacher had woken, or had never fallen asleep at all. He came over to where they sat, and put his hand on the boy's shoulder. He did not say a word. There wasn't anything to add to that. Some truths arrive not in words, but in the shape of a hand resting on the shoulder of a child who has just chosen to be brave. He had decided, in the small privacy of his own heart, that if God answered prayers by sending one widow, and one soldier, and one frightened boy, and one bruised young woman, and one quiet old station keeper into one snowbound way station on the same night, then God's answer was a strange one. But it was an answer, and he would not waste it. By morning, the storm had not broken. The drift was higher than the windows on the north side of the way station. The wounded soldier could barely lift his head, and his breath came in small, careful pulls, the way a man breathes when he is trying to measure out what is left. Mr. Whitlock came down from the upper bunk, shaved and dressed as carefully as if he were at a hotel in Denver. He poured coffee. He offered the bruised young woman bread, which she did not take. He complimented the station keeper on the beans, and the station keeper, who had been cleaning his cleaver that morning the way he cleaned it every morning whether he needed to or not, said only, He was not talking to strangers that day. Cora watched him. She had been married to a man who could read a stranger's intent by the way he held a cup of coffee, and she had inherited that small, careful skill. She saw, in the way Mr. Whitlock's fingers wrapped around the handle of his cup, index fingers slightly extended, 3 fingers pressed exactly even, a hand that had been taught to hold a knife before it had been taught to hold a pen. She saw, in the unhurried way he straightened his cuffs after pouring, a man who had done kind things with his hands all morning so that he could do one unkind thing that afternoon, and no one in the room would quite believe it of him. She sat down across from him. The lamp was on the table between them. The boy stood behind her, his right hand resting on his belt, the way his father had taught him to stand when he meant to be counted. Mr. Whitlock, Cora said, I would like to ask you a question. Of course, madam. Where is the deed you are looking for? Mr. Whitlock did not move. His smile did not change. His eyes did not leave hers. I beg your pardon, he said. You rode 3 days in the snow, alone on 3 seats, to watch my wrist. You sent a boy to spy on which side of the coach I slept on. I want to know where the deed you are looking for might be, because you have been looking for it so patiently. For one breath, the room was very quiet. The preacher turned his Bible over in his hands again. The young woman drew her coat tighter, and her hand closed. And for the first time since she had stepped off the coach, her face was not afraid but angry, which was its own kind of bravery. The wounded soldier's cough stopped, as if he were listening with his whole body the way a person listens to a thing that might decide whether they live past the morning. Then Mr. Whitlock said, very calmly, Mrs. Hale, I am afraid you have been imagining things. The storm has been long. We are all a little. I am not imagining things, Cora said. I am a 43-year-old widow, and I am tired, and my husband is 3 weeks in the ground, but I am not imagining things. She reached down and unlatched the leather cord from around her wrist. She set the tin strongbox on the table. It made a small, definite sound against the wood, the way a coffin lid makes a sound against its box, not loud, but final. This is what you want, she said. This is the deed to the southern parcel my husband refused to sell. This is the land that cuts the road your boss Calder wants to build. Open the strongbox. When you open it, the room will hear one of 2 things. And what are those 2 things? Mr. Whitlock said, still smiling. Either the deed, in which case I will ask you to take it and ride out of here as soon as there is a pass, and I will be very grateful I never see you again. The widow she was a week ago will be only a widow she was a week ago, and the morning will quiet itself, and I will ride on to Carson and bury my husband's affairs with his body, and that will be the end of it. That is the clean road. And the other thing, Mr. Whitlock said, the other thing is a thin pamphlet with my name printed on it, written in the hand of the lawyer in Carson, naming you and your boss Calder as the men who ordered the murder of my husband. That pamphlet has been copied and given to 3 men in 3 different towns, with instructions that if I do not arrive in Carson by the end of the month, they each open theirs. You were sent up here to kill me. But if I die, 3 copies of what you have done will be opened across this territory, and Mr. Calder will own a road that crosses a piece of land that every newspaper from here to Sacramento is going to be writing about. You kill me, and Mr. Calder loses twice. He loses the deed, and he loses the silence he has been buying with other men's lives. Clever, Mr. Whitlock said. He had stopped smiling. Not clever, Cora said. Careful. There is a difference, and one of them wears out faster than the other. If this story is moving you, you are exactly who we wrote it for. A like and a subscribe tells us to keep going. Mr. Whitlock reached across the table. The moment his fingers touched the lid of the strongbox, the boy brought the pistol up and held it level. The way Cora had watched her husband hold a tool he meant to use, and not the way he had held a thing he meant to threaten. The preacher stood. The bruised young woman stood. Even the wounded soldier had lifted his shoulders from the chair, his eyes red and very awake, and his good hand had closed around the arm of the chair with a grip that surprised even him. Open it, Cora said. Mr. Whitlock opened the strongbox. Inside was a folded deed and a folded pamphlet. Both lay flat against the tin. The pamphlet was thinner than a man's hand. The deed was heavier, with a red seal at its corner that caught the lamplight and held it. 2 roads, the preacher said softly. He can take his boss's road, and we all die, or he can take his own. Mr. Whitlock looked at the boy. The boy did not blink. Put the pistol away, son, Mr. Whitlock said. No, the boy said. Mr. Whitlock looked at the strongbox. He looked at the deed. He looked at the pamphlet. Then he looked at Cora, and for the first time in the 3 days the coach had been running, she saw something different in his face. He was afraid. Not of the pistol, not of the boy, of the thin pamphlet, and of the 3 other pamphlets he did not have, and of the woman across the table who had been measuring coffee cups all afternoon for this exact moment. Where is the copy in Carson? He said. You don't need to know that, Cora said. You need to write a letter. To whom? To your boss Calder. You will write it tonight. You will tell him the women and children along the Hale's land have been heard from. You will tell him there are witnesses in 6 towns. You will tell him there's no quiet way forward, and if he sends another man like you up this grade, that man will not come back down. And you will sign your own name to it, and the preacher will sign it, and the boy will sign it, and I will sign it. And in the morning, when the pass opens, you will ride down to the wire office at Greenwater, and you will send it yourself, in your own hand, with the exact waystation seal on the envelope, so he will know it was not a warning from a stranger. It was a warning from you, from his own man, telling him what he has already lost. And you trust me to ride to Greenwater? No, Cora said. We trust the boy to ride to Greenwater. You will be staying in this waystation until the storm clears, and then you will be riding with us to Carson, and then you will be speaking to a judge, and the judge will decide whether a man who had a chance to do right and went home instead is to be forgiven or remembered for what he was. There was a long silence. The lamp flickered once. The wind pressed against the north wall of the waystation the way a person stands against a closed door when they have been locked out, and then it eased, as if it had decided the door was not going to open tonight either. When Mr. Whitlock spoke again, his voice was different. The smooth confidence was gone. He sounded tired, the way a person sounds when they have been pretending for a long time that they are something better than what they are, and the pretending has become heavier than the truth ever was. You have been underestimated your entire life, haven't you? He said. That's what this is. Cora looked at him for a long moment. Yes, she said. That's what this is. The whole road is. He sat down slowly. He took a folded paper from his breast pocket and began to write, and the boy stood watching him the way a son watches a father he has decided, in the space of one long night, not to grow up to be. By the 3rd morning, the drift had begun to soften at the eaves. The wounded soldier was no worse. Cora had made him drink mustard tea, which he hated and which she believed had saved his life. The young woman had uncurled, a little, from the corner where she had been sitting. In the night she had whispered to the preacher, and the preacher had listened, and now she was sleeping on her side with her hands open, the way a person sleeps when the room they are in has begun to feel, for the first time, like a place they were not only passing through. The boy had taken the pistol apart again and cleaned it, slowly and carefully, the way a boy does when he is trying to make himself into a man who can hand the weapon back at the end of the journey and say, with his whole face, that he never meant to use it. The driver came in from the porch. He had a look on his face that Cora had only seen once before, when her husband had come in from the field the summer of the locusts and said, gently, "The worst of it has passed." "Pass is open," the driver said. They loaded the coach. Mr. Whitlock was helped into the last seat by the soldier, who was stronger that morning than he had any right to be. The boy sat across from him. The preacher sat beside the boy, his Bible in his lap, his hand resting on the boy's wrist, because the preacher had decided that if he could not protect every person in this coach, he could at least protect the one who had decided to be brave. The wounded soldier was wrapped in both blankets and placed near the stove at the front, where it was warmest. The young woman sat with her hand resting lightly, for the first time, on the back of the driver's seat, the way a person rests their hand when they are beginning to believe that the place they are going might be something other than a place to run from. Cora sat next to her strongbox. She did not rechain it to her wrist. There was no longer any reason to. The deed, once the most dangerous thing in the room, was now only a piece of paper with a seal on it, because the room had decided, one by one, that the widow was more important than the deed, and the widow's life was more important than the road Mr. Calder had been building for years out of other men's silence. The coach pulled out of the way station at first light. The snow lay deep on either side of the grate. The cold air cut against the windows. Somewhere ahead of them, in a town on the plain, her husband's grave was waiting. Somewhere behind them, on a desk in a lawyer's office, a pamphlet with her name on it was waiting. Somewhere to the west, a man named Calder was about to learn, by telegram, that the widow he had sent a killer to silence had answered him with a letter from a snowbound waystation, signed by his own man, witnessed by a preacher, a boy, a wounded soldier, an old station keeper who had washed his coffee cups the morning of it, as if it had been any other morning, and a young woman who had uncurled at last from the corner where she had kept herself small, and who was now sitting by the driver with her hand on his seat, singing quietly to herself a song she had not remembered how to sing until she heard the boy and the widow talking in the dark the night before, and understood that some songs only come back when the room around them has become safe enough to sing them in. The coach rolled down into the lower country, and the sun came through a break in the clouds, and the snow on the fields glittered like 1,000 small, deliberate lamps. The kind of person lights at a grave when they want, very quietly, to say that someone who is gone is not forgotten, and that what they protected in their life is being protected still by the people they left behind, who are no longer afraid to be seen doing it. Cora closed her eyes for a moment, just to rest them. The young woman beside her had begun, very softly, to sing. Next, we'll tell the story of a deaf woman who was sent to a remote ranch because her family was ashamed of her, and the blind rancher who could see her worth from the moment she arrived. Rest well tonight, and we'll see you there.